All right. Thank you, everybody. This is the July installment of the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. With me today is a good old friend of mine, Edwin Sarmiento. He's got a really interesting recent experience, and it spawned a presentation that I am eager to see. It's called The Psychology of Crisis: How Technology Professionals Respond to Disasters. And with that, go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe I'll share my slide deck just a little bit for the introduction and just introduce a little bit of the idea behind this. So I've been doing high availability and disaster recovery for close to 25 years. I'm dating myself. 25 years now. And part of what I've seen is that most of the time technology professionals like me, when it comes to high availability and disaster recovery, we're almost always focused on the tech aspect of this until I realized very recently, in probably the best way to explain that is by showing you a little bit of an alert that I got from my phone. So I was in in Lithuania, Baltics in Europe, excuse me, and this was a couple of weeks ago or months ago now, middle of May. I was there for a cybersecurity conference. And the idea behind that was, if you're speaking at a conference, you prepare as much as you can, you get ready. But this was the first day of the conference, and lo and behold, everybody got a notification on their phone. By the way, used AI to translate this, or even Google Translate. It tells you a little bit about what is actually happening. If I may read in translated English, probable air danger. Keyword probable. Now, of course, if it's something that you haven't had before. Now, here in North America, we're probably familiar with Amber Alerts. You get an Amber Alert. You somehow mute the Amber Alert when you get it. It's, why am I getting an Amber Alert 3 o'clock in the morning? I have no idea. But suffice to say, a lot of people, or the telecommunications company will send you Amber Alerts. But this is not something that you simply ignore. For one, it's not normal. How many of you would have an Amber Alert that would specifically say something like this? Now, of course, this was originally in Lithuanian, which I have no idea how to read or understand. So somebody translated it for us, and this is what it exactly said: probable air danger. I like the irony of what's written after that. Stay calm and find a safe place. 15 minutes later, a second notification on my phone showed up. Noticed the word probable is no longer there. It says the air danger with a strict instruction. Immediately hurry to shelter or safe place. Take care of your loved ones and wait for further instructions. Very encouraging. Now, let me paint a picture for those of you who are not familiar. Lithuania is on the borders of Russia, Belarus, and we know for a fact that it's been what, almost close to 3 to 4 years now, when the Russia-Ukraine war started. The country and the Baltic countries are kind of like accustomed to this at this point, where they will get an alert, and their military have had done kind of like awareness for the entire countries. And we're not just talking about Lithuania here, we're talking about Estonia, Latvia, and all the Baltic countries. This was the first time, and mind you, they've been getting these alerts for months. Okay. Because the side effect of warfare using drones, there's really no guarantee that a drone could eventually fly off of their borders or boundaries. The idea behind that was it's just a way of letting the citizens know that there is this something that's happening. But what struck me the most was the part of this message that says, hurry to a shelter or a safe place. Well, wait a second. If you tell me to hurry to a shelter, that means there already is a bomb shelter in place. So they've been preparing for this for quite a while because of the uncertainty. They don't really know what's going to happen. And it also tells me that, hey, take care of your loved ones and wait for further instructions. So there's really something uncertain about this message. Lo and behold, there's news that are happening within the city of Vilnius. There are several bomb shelters disguised as bus stops. In case somebody would be getting this message right in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the city, there are apps with GPS locations of bomb shelters within the city. And I guess it's within the whole country. But of course, the focus more of this is within densely populated locations. Quite interesting. And it's interesting to also observe how people responded. People who are used to this, like, no big deal. But majority of the people that I was with during that time were panicking. Didn't know what to do. There was one guy from the UK who was like, I don't know what to do. What do I do next? I have a train to catch. What are they? Can't even he can't even speak at that point. The airport was closed. Some of the ports were closed. Bus stations were travel was paused. It's like literally a ghost town for a couple of minutes. We were at this location for a conference. Speakers were supposed to be flying in. Lo and behold, I think about 5 or 7 speakers canceled. Never bothered coming in because, for one, there's no uncertainty when the airport's going to open back. So they canceled, but the show must go on, and so we are there throughout the conference. And I'm telling you the story as an observation of how emergencies happen in real life. That's also one of the reasons why I kind of understood how important it is for us to consider and recognize the value of how we humans respond in crisis. That's why I call this the psychology of crisis and how technology professionals respond to disaster situation. Now, I highlighted technology professionals, but remove that label. We're all humans. This is how we humans behave when it comes to disasters. And I'm not just talking about disasters in general. I'm talking about disasters that could apply specifically to you because unless we're aware of certain disasters, there's no way for us to know if it even exists. And if it does exist, how are we supposed to respond? Okay, that's the whole gist of this presentation. Okay, so the question there really is asking why perfect DR plans fail. Now, here's the assumption that I'm going to make. Number one, you have a high availability and or disaster recovery solution in place. And I'm talking about your IT infrastructure, your databases, the whole 9 yards when it comes to your data assets. I'm also going to assume that you've prepared for DR documentation, DR plan, business continuity, and all the things that you need. Okay, if you don't have that, please, action item for this session, write down, I need a DR plan. I need a BCP plan. Okay, that's kind of like the assumption that I'm making. So why do perfect disaster recovery plans fail? And this is a byproduct of not just empirical observations, but also understanding how I'm human, right? How I respond to disasters. And I found correlations between my behavior and people's behaviors when it comes to disaster recovery. Now, I may be a high availability and disaster recovery expert. People think, yeah, he's really good at clustering, availability groups, failover clustered instances. Surprisingly, when my customers come to me about high availability and disaster recovery, I don't focus on the tech. The tech is easy. What's not easy is the people and the process piece. So why do perfect DR plans fail? And again, the assumption there is you have a disaster recovery plan, you have a project in place, you had all the teams involved to be part of this, you've documented it, you've tested it, but why do perfect DR plans fail? And I did say fail in the context of real world, not simulated testing. Okay, there's a big difference between simulated testing where everybody's having coffee, somebody's on their phone checking Instagram feeds, That's simulated testing. Real world disasters are when something bad really happens. You did not plan for it. You're not ready for it. And so no amount of disaster recovery planning and documentation and preparation will actually um, meet what the needs of the moment are. But why do they fail? Number one, DR plans fail because they rarely focus on people. Rarely. And I'm guilty of this myself when I was starting out in my career. Give you an example. I was brought in to build an HA and a DR strategy for a global SharePoint implementation. I felt really bad saying SharePoint, but the idea behind that is we were building an entire SharePoint farm, high availability for both SharePoint and SQL Server, and then disaster recovery for, again, both SharePoint and SQL Server. I built the entire architecture. I deployed it. We tested production. We were commissioned to have DR, built the DR piece, wrote the documentation, tested the DR piece. Project manager signed off, and I'm pretty sure you've had this experience, and everybody's happy because we just got the signature of the person responsible for the entire project. Uh, How many of those? Because when you look at the project plans, you have like sections of the project plans where, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. Main assumption, we lost an entire data center. What are we going to do? Oh, checkbox. Failover or redirect routing, network routing. Check. Bring up cluster. Check. Oh, change the DNS pointers. Check. All of these things we do as a side effect of us testing whether or not our disaster recovery plans and documentations actually work. In relation to what we built as far as the technology layer, and as far as the person who wrote the documentation, and as far as the people responsible for operations are concerned. That's how we build our DR plans. However, we rarely focus on people. Rarely. Well, what do you mean? I was brought in as a consultant. I'm not a full-time employee. The minute that the project manager signed off on the document or on the project saying, hey, we're done, everything's successful, I step back and I'm gone. That's one. So how sure are they that when real disasters happen, competent people, people who have the skills, who are even familiar with that this thing exists, how sure are they that the people who need to fill in my shoes will be able to do exactly what I did? It's that question where, yeah, we're good with the documentation. We're good with the whole process. We've tested it. We've validated it. Oh, by the way, we are going to do it again in the next quarter. Sure. But then all of this is simulated disasters without consideration for the actual people. Okay. The other thing that you have to really think about when it comes to planning for disasters is number one, rarely are the people who built this, who tested it, who validated it, will be the ones working with it during a disaster. What do I mean by that? I was doing I was doing my SQL Server Always On Available Groups training way back 2017. Live setting, live class. One person in the class bailed out of nowhere. Bailed out. Next day, before the class started, sent an email saying, apologizing, say, I'm sorry, I bailed out of the class. There was an emergency, and I thought it was a severity one emergency. Um, there was a hurricane warning. She was living in the state of Florida, and they were instructed to evacuate, leave home, drive up north because it's safer until further notice. Similar to that text message that I got on my phone. In that moment, when you're in a state of emergency, when there's actual disasters happening, none of what you did matters. What do I mean by none of what you did matters? Doesn't matter if you have like 4 node Windows Server failover cluster with automatic failover between data centers. None of that matters because what matters is your safety. And the way you respond will always be I'm getting ahead of myself here, but will always be in the context of your own safety. Okay? And that's why, again, most of the disaster recovery plans that we make, we prepare, we document, we validate, we sign off on, rarely, and I say rarely, focus on people. Okay? And these are the same people that I did mention will have different roles throughout the disaster recovery planning phase, implementation, testing, validation, and then doing the exercise. We're looking at planning, testing, and executing the DR plans. I mentioned earlier, um, if you go back to some of the DR projects that you've done, there's a different team that's managing the planning. There's a different team that's managing the execution. There's a different team that's managing the operations. It's ideal if you have the same person or the same team doing all of these. Unfortunately, that's not, it's unrealistic. Okay. Even in large organizations where you have segregation of duties, where, okay, it's the project team spearheading the DR project, and then they would commission the engineering team. The storage team will take care of the storage, and then the server team, the network team, totally different teams. And then the engineering team, will write the documentation, build the entire thing, and then hand it off to operations. Operations will then do the execution. Meaning, okay, we'll validate it. We're following what's normally referred to as best practices. Let the most senior engineer write the documentation, and then let the most junior engineer test whether or not the documentation works. Part of the DR exercise is checking not just boxes, but if the DR plan would actually work the way we expect it to work. There are different people, different sets of people with planning, testing, and that's just reality. But what most people don't realize, just like what I mentioned, why most DR plans fail, is because of the fact that even though we have people on the project team planning for the DR project, people from the engineering team taking care of the implementation, design, testing, validating, and then the operations team taking care of making sure that the project actually works, is in most cases, those people are in the same place. They're in the same location. And when an actual disaster happens, people who are doing the planning, people who are doing the implementation, people who are doing the execution and operations, if they're in the same place and a disaster happens, kind of like that incident that happened to me, chances are they'll probably be behaving the same way in an emergency. Okay. And again, ask yourself this question. Go back to a very recent incident. And of course, with global warming and all of these things happening, maybe it's extreme heat, like unexplainable weather patterns. Sometimes it's causing emergencies that we were not expecting. We just had like a massive downpour this past Canada Day where a lot of basements were flooded. Very first time happened in the city. And this is something that we've never experienced before. Now, mind you, number one, it was a holiday. Number two, even if I'm working 24 by 7 and my basement is flooded, I don't really care about technical operations at this point. I'm thinking about whether or not my basement is not going to get flooded because of the incident. Okay. So all of these things factor in. Okay. The other thing is that emergencies trigger survival. You probably have gotten the theme of what this whole presentation is really all about. Emergencies trigger survival. Doesn't matter if you're the best DBA in the world, one of a kind, you're a unicorn when it comes to your technical skills. When an emergency happens, that goes out the window, literally. And I remember there was a quote by a former Navy SEAL that says, "We kind of expect people to rise up to the occasion. No, we fall down to the baseline of our experience." Okay. Most people would say, "Oh, I've trained for this." No, Even if you're the best DBA in the world, the best sysadmin, best engineer in the world, your training can only take you so much, so far. Okay. We don't rise up to the occasion during emergency situations. We fall back to our baseline. And with emergencies triggering survival, psychologists, and again, maybe it's just me trying to understand myself, these emergency situations and these survival instincts trigger what I call the 3F. Okay. It defaults to what I call fight, flight, or freeze. Go back to the last time you had to restore from backup a corrupted database. And we're talking about a mission critical production database. How did you feel while you were doing that? Okay. How did you respond? Okay. If that was the first time you've done it and you've never experienced something like that before, and your CEO or your CIO is behind your back screaming, when is this coming back online? You respond differently. You behave differently. Okay. Again, a couple of years ago when I was doing the always on available groups training class online, one of the exercises, and we were doing this troubleshooting exercises, 3 replica availability group. I had the availability group dashboard in the screen, and I kicked off a batch file that would trigger an issue. Now, the dashboard in itself would create a false sense of security because, well, everything's working fine. You'll have all green check marks. The minute that one icon turned from green to red, somebody in the chat said, I felt my heart stand still. And that was just simulation. It's not even real. And it's a contrived example. But because it's not something that you see every day, the way you respond will be totally different. Okay? A firefighter who's been fighting fires for years hears an alarm, hears an alert, put on the clothes, get on a fire truck, responds like a normal day. It's like Tuesday. Navy SEALs got called for mission, emergencies. They don't even panic. They just pack their gear, get on the car, and drive. That's it. But most of us don't deal with these kinds of situations every day. Like that example that I mentioned. How many people, how many tourists would get a notification on their phone stating, go find a bomb shelter and be safe? So, how you respond will depend on how exposed you are to these kinds of situations. Now, I'm not saying you go expose yourself to those kinds of situations, but because that's also unhealthy. However, I'm simply stating the fact that in emergency situations, your survival instincts will default to either fight, flight, or freeze. It's one of the reasons why it's very important for you to test. We're not just recommending that you test fixing corrupted pages on your database because it's fun and exciting. Because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. When it happens, how are you going to respond? If you've never done it before, I can guarantee you, you would freeze within the next 5 minutes. And it's not because you cannot do it. It's just because your brain is so unfamiliar with it, you don't know how to respond. Even though your skills, even though your expertise and your training have prepared you for that, your brain was not prepared for it. It's also one of the reasons, it's one of the things that distinguishes an incident where an engineer with years and years of experience experienced an outage and took like 40 minutes to 15 minutes to bring a failover cluster online versus me coming into the picture, find out what the problem was, 5 minutes later, bring everything back online. It's not because I know more. It's just because of the fact I've seen so many cases like that and I don't panic. Okay. It's not about me having more, of course, skills still factor in. It's just the fact that I'm more familiar with it. I get exposed to it a lot. And so for me to respond to it will be the difference between 5 minutes versus somebody who's been working on it for like 40 minutes. Big difference. There's a side effect of the what I call the three F's. When you're in survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze will be your default response. Fight, that's not my problem, or not my fault. Flight, you escalate without even looking at it, or freeze, you just like this. Okay. And whatever your level of training is, whatever your how many years of experience you have, survival will always do what it's supposed to do. The brain will always do what it's designed to do. Because whatever plan, whatever preparation you have, survival will always override any disaster recovery plan. And why am I even talking about this? Because again, we spend so much time identifying the appropriate technical solution. We've spent so much time planning, implementing, executing, and testing, validating, documenting, all of these things. But we forgot the most important piece, us. We forgot the most important piece of the puzzle, which is humans. And again, it's more than just observation in general, but this reminds me of when I was in high school, growing up in the Philippines. We had the second largest volcanic eruption in the 20th century back in 1991. The Philippines used to have the largest United States military installation in Asia Pacific. Mother Nature had other plans. Naval base and Air Force base were covered in ash, mud flows everywhere. And this reminded me of my experience as a high school kid. We were a couple of 100 kilometers or a couple of miles away from our families. We've never experienced anything like this before. They themselves, the victims, were in the vicinity. Homes were devastated, farmlands were covered. They did not know how to respond. How they managed to get out of that situation was somebody else who were not directly affected by it coming in and rescuing them. In every situation, in every disaster that's happening, any emergency response, rarely would you find the people who are directly affected are also the ones taking them out of that situation. It's almost always somebody else outside of the affected situation that would come in and do the work, help them, and rescue them out of that situation. Because again, there is no arguing about how we humans respond when it comes to emergency situations. Okay. And it's also interesting because when you think about some of the most recent incidents, like the Iran, Middle East issue that's happening, you might be thinking, what does that have to do with IT? A lot of companies in the Middle East had assets, IT assets on AWS data centers, Middle East AWS data centers. Of course, proper DR planning, right? Put one of your assets, your production assets on one AWS region, put it on another region for DR. That way, if that region goes offline, we're safe, we're covered. What are the chances that both AWS regions in the Middle East got struck by drones at that point? Nobody was prepared for that. And pretty sure even the AWS data center engineers at that point were not thinking about, do we spin up another data center or something? No, I'm pretty sure what they're more concerned about at that point is, how do I get out of here to be safe? That's the question that we're asking. In fact, a lot of these technology innovations, whether I'm going back to Windows, whether that's Windows that started way back in Windows Server 2008 R2, the capability to fail over across different data centers, was actually a byproduct of Hurricane Katrina. Because nobody in the data center would fail over the clusters to a different data center. They're all trying to be safe. And that's why it's important for us to address the human psychology in actual disasters. Okay? Excuse me. It's addressing the human psychology. And again, emphasizing the fact that we barely talk about these things, let alone prepare for it. It is important because I doubt that AI is going to spin up another data center on their own. They're going to rack and stack servers, connect. I doubt that AI will ever be able to do that, even with the help of robots. But the idea behind that is, again, for us to be prepared as humans when real disaster happens. Because no amount of planning, no amount of preparation, no amount of training, and even law enforcement officers, you can ask the military, Navy SEALs, you can ask them this. No amount of training prepares you for when something is happening right there. Doesn't matter if you've gone through, the most extensive training there is. Emergencies happen and your instinct will fall back to survival. So how do we address that? How do we address this thing? Number one, train under pressure. What do I mean by train under pressure? I'm not suggesting that you subject yourself to too much pressure. All I'm simply saying is, if you're doing simulated DR tests, make it realistic. Don't do DR simulated tests in the middle of a business day where you're basically having good coffee just after a snack break and trying to scroll through Instagram feeds. Okay. This is not realistic. Okay. And I've learned this when I was still working as a data center engineer in Singapore. We rarely experienced earthquakes. Rarely. We were in our office, fifth floor of a high-rise building, and lo and behold, we felt the entire building shake. Now, keep in mind, this was the entire engineering team taking care of the entire data center in one place. We were all instructed to leave everything behind, take the stairs, not the elevator, and wait outside. That was when we realized our business continuity plan needs to be realistic. And that's when we started building a team outside of Singapore. We had one in Malaysia. We had one in China. But that was the time that we realized when real disaster happens, it's not supposed to be us taking care of this. Okay? Training under pressure goes beyond going through the notions of this is what we do when we have a disaster recovery plan. This is all the assets that we need to fail over. Yeah, you database team, you'll take care of the database. You network team, you take care of networking. You server team, you take it. It's beyond just that. You train with realistic stuff. Now, of course, this is too much to ask if you've never experienced something like that in the past. You can never prepare for everything. And over anticipating something is more often than not very expensive because you'll never know what to prepare for. If you ask people in California, why are your servers bolted to the ground? Because earthquake is a thing. Now ask the people in the East Coast, what earthquakes? So the way people respond to disasters will always be dependent on how exposed they are and their experiences. Now, I cannot take my experience being born and raised in a country where we had volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and typhoons and I can't bring that experience with me here because we rarely have those kinds of experience. However, we can prepare for the things that are statistically probable when it comes to happening within the next 5 or 10 years. But train under pressure with realistic scenarios. And this is, again, the kind of thing that I emphasize with my customers even. In a real disaster, forget that your senior people are there. Forget that you're there. Assume somebody else will take care of it. Question is, do you have someone else? Which leads me to the second point, which is different teams for different purposes. Okay, I've laid out how a normal or typical disaster recovery plan or disaster recovery project would work. Hey, we want our databases to be replicated to a different data center. So you have the project team leading the entire project, commissioning the engineering team to build, design, implement, configure, test, validate, roll it out to production, and then commissioning the operations team. Hey, you're now taking care and managing this. Sure, ideal, right? But keep in mind, the more people you bring into the picture, the more expensive it becomes. And sometimes they're not even doing anything. What do you mean they're not even doing anything? Well, if you dedicate a team just for DR, then more often than not, they're not going to be doing anything, right? And this is where the structure of the organization becomes very important. For large organizations, they can afford it. If you're a small and medium-sized organization, sometimes it's better to outsource it. Of course, now there's the challenge of deciding, do I outsource it to an expensive team or a cheaper team? Okay, because now it's a conversation around cost. But understand that they have to have different teams for different people and different purposes. And sometimes, ideally, in different locations. Hopefully, they speak the same language, they have the same culture. Okay. And again, this is easier said than done when you have different teams for different purposes. So we talked about the human aspect of this, where you're training under pressure, where you're uh, doing more realistic simulations. Okay. And again, maybe something that you've not experienced before, like especially today with technology evolving and becoming better. How many people out there have experienced storage corruption issues? Rarely. It was very frequent from way back about 15, 20 years ago, very frequent. And so when something like that happens, people don't know how to respond. And unfortunately, even senior people who have the experience, the expertise are no longer there. They're retired. And there's no way for you to access those people nowadays because, again, they're no longer available. Okay. And then different teams for different purposes. And this is the third one is very, very, very important. Okay. Third one, you might be wondering, this is a talk about disaster recovery and you're talking about work-life balance. Um, Learned this the hard way. And understanding how we humans behave and respond. I talked about the default response of every human being when it comes to emergencies. How we default to fight, flight, or freeze in an emergency. On the extreme side, there's no emergency, but then you're bombarded with work. You're stressed out, you're tired, you're exhausted. Your brain is not functioning properly as a side effect of this. I remember working on a case a couple of years ago. I was still working for a managed services provider, and I couldn't figure out why a failover cluster is not coming online. Good thing it's not in production yet. We're getting ready for it. 4 hours. I've been working on it for 4 hours, going through the cluster error log, nothing. I told my boss, do you mind taking over this? I'm just going to take a nap. And of course, my version of nap is an hour and a half, sometimes longer. Woke up, took over the ticket, looked at it again, and lo and behold, in less than 25 minutes, solved the problem. Now, I could assume that it has something to do with me taking a nap, or I could also assume that I just let my brain relax for a while. We've created this culture in tech where, you gotta grind, you gotta put on work, we normalize 60-hour weeks. If you're not working hard enough, you're not productive. The company I used to work for, they were all Oracle people, and they called the Microsoft people the slackers. And we created this culture where it has to be, again, longer working hours and not even taking vacation days, not realizing it's counterproductive. You couple that with responding to a disaster. Somebody, and this is kind of ironic. Why does it always have to be at 3 o'clock in the morning when an emergency shows up, right? You couple that with, I haven't slept, I'm overworked, I'm stressed out, and I have to deal with a disaster. How do you expect me to respond? And I only realized this when I used to work as a DBA for a managed service provider where we were on call from Friday night up until like Sunday night. Nobody is taking over the on call until Sunday night. Good luck if you got like thousands of pages. And it's normal for us back then because we're covering not just the North American time zone, but global time zone. It's normal for us. So you kind of expect not to be sleeping throughout the weekend. And we have an SLA. So if you get a ticket, you get an alert, 5 minutes, can't figure it out. The internal policy is to escalate because they kind of assumed when you're in a stress response or again, a fight or flight response situation, you're not going to be able to think properly. Work-life balance is very, very important. And that's also one of the reasons why you have a responsibility. We have a responsibility. If you're taking care of mission critical systems, don't push yourself too hard. And I'm not saying never. Because some stress is good. There is a thing called good stress where you're forcing yourself to grow, and as a side effect of it, you'll learn, you grow. But there's also this other extreme where when you're constantly pushing yourself too hard, you barely take a break, you don't even get quality time for yourself. Now, I could talk about this and just spend an entire session on simply work-life balance, but direct impact of this is you not being able to respond to disasters if and when necessary. That's the side effect. Now, there's so many things that I can cover in the session when it comes to the human aspect of the psychology. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again. And I thought initially it was just my experience, but seeing it firsthand from my customers' experiences also validates the fact that when we humans, regardless of education, the skills, the training, the exposure and experience, when real emergency happens, we respond differently. That's also one of the reasons why when an emergency situation happens, it's ideal that you can escalate it to somebody who's not even familiar with your situation. Why? Because they have a fresh set of eyes. They're not stressed out. They're not in a flight, fight, or freeze state. They're not in a survival state. They just have to deal with the problem. And so understanding the human dynamics behind disaster recovery helps you prepare for not just the technical aspect of the planning. And again, as technical professionals, very obvious. We like getting our hands dirty. We're nerds, we're geeks. We like to do the work. We like to understand all these things. But understand the disaster recovery is more than just the tech. It's more than just the process. At the center of all of this is the people. Okay. How we respond to emergencies and how we respond to disasters will determine whether or not the disaster will spin off into much worse disaster or how we can eventually be successful. And whether that's failing over to a totally different data center, spinning up a new instance of everything, whether that's on public, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, we as technology professionals will be the one responsible for it. Now, I'm looking at some of the chats in here, and I know there are questions. And David was saying, yeah, burnout is real. We've created in tech, we've created this culture, and I blame Silicon Valley for that. That we've created this culture where if you're not hustling, you're not succeeding. Well, what's the point of succeeding if you're dead? What's the point of succeeding if you're not even going to enjoy life? Okay. And for me, and again, I used to think that this is simply just work-life balance, but then I started seeing the impacts of this in mission-critical platforms where you have to really think quick, fast, decide fast, take action quickly, but you can't do that if you're stressed out, you're tired, and your default response is fight, flight, or freeze. That's also one of the reasons why, and this is an exercise that we did, and every time I do training workshops with my customers, like For 2 minutes, pause, relax, take a deep breath. Because we rarely do that. Rarely. Some people think, and this was me a couple years ago, we think it's weird. We think it's weird for us to slow down, take a deep breath, and relax before we even do the work. However, that's research has shown, and I believe that the science is still catching up on this. Research has shown that barely, or as simple as taking a deep breath calms our nervous system for us to actually do more challenging stuff. Okay. I want to share my contact information, link, blog, email. If you have any questions, feel free, put them on the chat. Happy to answer all those questions. Yeah, DBA's default blame acceptor. It's
The
it's just what it is.
nature of the job. I've got a really good example of fight, flight, or freeze. You remember Atlanta Olympics back in '96? Remember that bomb that went off down there? I was 6 blocks from where it went off. So I'm just working at a little vendor booth, just minding my own business, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in the middle of skyscrapers. We're in the middle of Centennial Park, and the echoes made the explosion sound seem like it came from everywhere and nowhere. And I'm just sitting there going, hmm, that's interesting. Wasn't right around me, so okay. And then I watched people panic. Thousands of people just started running in any possible direction that they could see. And then some people just completely froze. And there's some people, there was a little old lady, she just standing there holding a drink and just dropped it. I still remember that. It's like I had to help her to a bench. She was just panicked. And it was truly eye-opening. It's again not something I wish on anybody, but to be in the middle of something like that and to see it in action, even if you see a car accident at an intersection just
Oh
driving
yeah.
around one day, you'll see people just completely panic. Some people just take off as fast as they can, even if they had nothing to do with it, and other people just freeze. And it's an amazing psychological response. Yeah, and you ask about database corruption 2 days ago. Yep.
What's even worse is this, and I'm bringing it back to something more familiar. You're fixing a database corruption issue. Never dealt with it before. It's an emergency response. You fumble, right? You restore a backup that was from like a couple of months ago instead of from yesterday. That's not a mistake. That's just you responding naturally. It's just a human nature. It's human nature's response to an emergency. And that's also one of the reasons why, and I'm not suggesting you cause issues just so you can practice. That's why it's important for you as humans to learn how to regulate our nervous system, because otherwise immediate response, and this, my phone's over there. Notifications have created an environment where number one, instant gratification has triggered a lot of these responses. And I remember, for those of you who can still remember, the very first familiar Nokia ringtone or text ringtone, where there was a study back then where just hearing, specifically for technology professionals, just hearing the sound of the Nokia ringtone would spike up their blood pressure
Yep.
because they've associated that with issues raised, an alert notification from the system that's down. So it's created that, and it's not healthy because you're subjecting yourself to severe um, internal pressure that has nothing to do with what's going on around you, but everything's internal.
Go for it.
I think it's very similar with a Slack notification nowadays. It's
Yes.
still, hmm
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
with some professionals, they'll hear a Slack notification at any hour of the day and
Mhm.
fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
I have curated my Slack notifications heavily to not bother me so much because they are such a distraction and a focus suck.
Yeah. One of the
Yeah.
one of the most fun DR projects I was ever a part of was for a trucking company, and we helped engineer the data platform continuity underneath it. But I gave the CIO an idea, and he ran with it. They don't just do DR tests; they fail over to DR and run from DR for 1 week out of every month. First Friday of the month they fail over. Second Friday of the month they fail back. And the remaining 2 Fridays of the month, half the team get that Friday off as a thank you for working a couple evenings. And it works out great. And I love it. First Thursday of the month, CIO gets everybody together in the room. They said, okay, we're doing our DR over failover tomorrow. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead. And he'll pick 10% of the people in the room and he'll say, you are dead. You cannot participate in this DR drill. And if anybody in that room can't fail over and fail back the systems that that person is responsible for, then that person has failed. They can fail over 900 critical systems in exactly 42 minutes. And their business insurance got cut in half. Absolutely incredible because they're in the Midwest here. They're in Tornado Alley. They need to be able to fail over everything if there is a hint of a very severe storm coming. And it is, to this day, it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
But that's also coming from the top where he understood the
Hmm.
value of people, he understood the
Yep.
value of culture. He
Yep.
understood that it's not just the technical layer that's doing all the work, it's the
Hmm.
people underneath it doing
Yep.
that's doing all the work.
Yeah.
I have
Good.
a quick question,
Yeah.
like a
Sure.
technical question. What does it mean to fail over and fail back?
Anytime you're running a data center, so let's say you've got IT equipment in a data center in a building somewhere. You'll have a copy of this that's either kept up to date periodically or in real time somewhere else, another physical location. Could be down the street, could be halfway across the world. So the act of doing a failover literally means you're taking the primary core of all these things that are running from site A to site B. May not be immediate. There might be a small outage associated with it. Maybe there's a big outage. Just depends on your RPO and RTO, your SLAs that guarantee uptime and availability and recovery time. But it
Hmm.
means like literally in my house here, I live in Tornado Alley. My entire lab, my business, all my critical everything. Some of it's here, some of it's not. If this house gets hit by a tornado, I lose nothing. And I can have my entire business and my entire test lab up and running in 30 minutes. And all I have to do is say, let's go. And I start flipping the switches. So that's a failover. And then the harder part, fail back. And that's what a lot of companies don't really envision, and that's why with a lot of places that maybe have their equipment in a public cloud provider, failover becomes easier. If it's on premises gear, you have to maintain equipment somewhere else or even multiple places. You have to be the one to architect and engineer it. And then you have to be able to fail it back. You know,
Fail it
it,
back means go back to the home
yeah,
base.
yeah.
Okay. Hmm.
It's fascinating. So imagine this. Um, and not maybe not just from IT, but just in general. This is a legitimate thing that happened at one of my sites. So we maintain data platform underneath a lot of companies all over the place. All of a sudden, one day, it's Monday morning, everybody's at work doing their thing. Somebody knocks on the front door. It's somebody in a hazmat suit carrying a gas mask. This is real. And the guy at the building or at the front door said, "You must all be out of here in 5 minutes. And you cannot be within 5 square miles of where you're standing right now. You have 5 minutes, pack it up and leave." It was a train derailment. And sounds reasonable, right? The train was carrying nuclear waste.
Ooh.
Yeah. So the building was fine. The electrical grid was fine. The internet connection was perfectly fine. But there was a chance that there was nuclear waste in the area, and the EPA needed to come in and actually certify that there was no contamination. So entire company cleared out. And then because of the stress, the router went down to the building. They had too many people connecting remotely. They had never tested that volume of people. So the failover there would have been to just say, okay, turn that off, fail over to another location. And maybe we don't have physical proximity to a warehouse, which is what they had, but people can still answer the phones, people can still check their emails, things like that. And it's it's fascinating because the tech, just like Edwin said, the tech side of this is easy, relatively speaking. It's the people, it's the culture, it's the business, it's the practices and the policies and the willingness of the business as a whole to actually invest in an IT continuity strategy that supports the business.
That is really interesting. Thank you so much for that example.
Oh, you're
I
welcome.
I'm coming not from a tech background, but from
Huh.
a generalist background.
Mm,
I graduated from Stanford in 2025, so last
congrats.
year. Thank you. I studied science, technology, and society. My
Wow.
concentration was in catastrophic risk and solutions. So I have a unique interest in
Yeah.
catastrophes of many different levels and the psychology of catastrophes, the psychology of disasters. How do people react in emergencies? And I really want to thank Edwin for sharing that, people really do fall down to basic survival when it comes to disasters. When it
Mm.
comes to when things get real, we have to think about our most vulnerable and how they'll react, those who don't have any information on how to or any exposure of this disaster that can be mitigated. So I'm very interested in this conversation. I currently work as a security associate at a nearby museum. I'm in Minnesota as
Nice.
well.
Nice.
So I'm just really happy just to have this conversation because
It's so much
I
fun.
practice it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for joining. And just so you know, we meet every month. Um, this is one of the more human related topics. We do a lot of technical stuff, but feel free, join and bring your insight because this is fantastic. Thank you.
And I
Yeah.
try
Well,
I try my
mhm.
best as somebody who's been in the community for quite a while. People expect me to do like technical sessions. I'm like, you can use AI nowadays for that, but there's
Yeah,
things that you can never learn unless you've experienced it yourself.
yeah.
And the human part of everything is never going to change, and it's always going to be necessary.
And it's always going to be unpredictable. Yeah, even
Exactly.
in 1993, I grew up in the state of Georgia in the US and got hit by a hurricane. And then the hurricane stopped. And in the town that I lived in, we got 38 inches of rain in 3 days. Our house flooded. Uh, we were trapped in the city because all the bridges and roads leaving the city were flooded. Um, People went absolutely overboard. They panicked. They didn't know what to do. Yeah, I mean, I'm the one that found the water in our house. That wasn't fun.
The flooding water.
Yeah, yeah, a third of our house flooded for 2 weeks.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's 10:30 at night. I see a puddle on the floor in my bedroom, which was downstairs, going, okay, I think my brother might have spilled a glass of water. So went upstairs, he was asleep. Went downstairs, the entire carpet was wet. Like, that's not ideal. So stood there for about a minute, just going, now what? And at that point, the water started creeping over the top of the carpet. So went upstairs, woke up my parents, and then in 20 minutes, we emptied the basement of just everything, killed the power to the bottom part of the house, ripped out all the paneling, all the insulation, anything that could have just wicked the water up the walls. And at that point, it was up to my knees. And I'm just like, we'll just open the back door. Water just flowed through the house for 2 weeks. But yeah, it the whole reaction is a fascinating psychological aspect. And um, even I mentioned database corruption. I broke my own test lab on Sunday, and it knocked out one of my databases on my test machines. No big deal. Recover it. But if you've never recovered it before, then what are you going to do? And the act of testing under stress, it's brutal. And one of the fun things I do. I do kind of like Edwin here. I do a lot of technology training and professional services around this stuff. Whenever we set up a database high availability solution, I have a lot of fun with it. So I walk through the setup with the customer, show them how it works, and then it's like, okay, get your hands on the keyboards. I'm gonna break it. I'm not gonna tell you what I did. And now fix it. Ask me questions along the way, but you fix it. And then we'll break it again a different way and then fix
Breaking
it.
the keyboard?
It's not the keyboard. No, I'll literally behind the scenes, I'll do something that takes what we just set up and it knocks it offline or causes it to act really funny or throws some kind of an error that had that been a live system would have impacted the business. And there's about 5 or 6 different scenarios. And by the time we're done, these are the common things that you're going to probably encounter, statistically speaking, over the lifespan of this environment. And we've gone through the statistically probable stuff, and now you know how to fix it. And by the way, here's the recording so you know what you did. It's a lot of fun. Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have another question. There's you're mentioning this example of this company that fails back and fails over and fails back, and then they reduce their insurance because they were so successful in how they're able to like over and then fail back.
Hmm.
And then like when they chose like three random people, every time they did the test, is it just like testing if they're able to have those like backup, or if like the systems were able to be carried forward by other people in the case that those people were not available or like quote unquote dead? Is
Yeah,
that what it?
yeah. It's literally who in the company has done their job and actually documented and automated in that order the process of taking this machine and bringing it up at the other location. And anybody in that room has to be able to follow that set of directions. And if they can't, then it's not clear enough. It's not complete or thorough enough. And in addition to failover, this is how that person should be able to test that system. And it could be copy and paste and run the script. You get a thumbs up on it, life is good. It could be
Mm-hmm.
call this team of people and ask if this application server is up and powering the business. Or hit a button and it runs something and they get a test print page to a ticket printer in a warehouse or something. They're even that company, they've got 600 phone lines related to a fax
Wow.
system. Yeah, believe it or not, trucking still runs on faxes all over the place.
Still.
Yeah, so they've got an automated mechanism to hit a button and it will loop through all these phone numbers and send a test fax to the other location. And then the procedure is to pick up the phone, call this phone number. There will be somebody at that location and ask if every fax machine there got a page printout. It's
Whoa.
it's it's yeah, like 600 machines across all these different platforms, and every one of them should have had a test print.
I
And
think
even
that's
if
something I'm very interested in general. I mean that's actually really impressive. The whole like 600 numbers and the 600 fax machines all around, in a country, for example, or around the world. Something I'm interested in is just like the different areas that risk is connected to. So say for
everything.
how, predictability of risk and how that is, raised or lowered and how insurances like do their business based off of that. Like you mentioned, Edwin mentioned earlier the conflict happening in the Middle East right now. How many data centers are able to we're able to kind of predict or not predict the vast scale of this conflict. It's
Unfortunately, it's if it's something and we can throw in science and statistics and all. There's an entire career on this, and that's what a lot of scientists do for insurance companies. But again, if you're in the Middle East, that's normal. You kind of expect that because you'll live there,
Yeah,
right? But if
some
I'm
degree, yeah.
right, but if I'm, let's say, I'm CTO of AWS in North America, I get assigned there. My perspective is totally different from the perspectives of the people there, and so the
well,
expectations are different.
even if you're there, I have a friend of mine who is there in physical security. They planned for a location getting hit. they never planned for all the locations to get hit. And
What happened in that case?
you are SOL.
What does that
Right,
mean?
poop out of luck. It
Yeah, yeah.
essentially, yeah, I mean, think about it. If you've got a data center in, let's say, 3 locations, all that could have been hit by missiles from Iran, and each of them are running at, let's say, 50% capacity, you can only take out one of those locations and realistically sustain the workload in the other two if you do a failover of literally every single thing that data center is supposed to do. If all 3 get hit, everything goes down. And if you as an organization have said, my data cannot reside outside of the boundaries of my country,
Data sovereignty.
yep. Now we've been doing a lot of that lately. And that data center provider doesn't have the capacity elsewhere in the country to actually run this stuff. They're down. You either have to say, it's okay if my data is restored outside of my country's borders and deal with the consequences just because you have the business up and running. Or you just say, because of my security requirements, that portion of whatever this thing is powering for the business is down until further notice. That's
And that
brutal.
and that's why the people aspect is very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Because in a situation like that, imagine nothing. I lost everything.
Yeah.
For some people who are not used to that, they start to panic. Again, the
Hmm.
3 Fs, right? But if you're in a survival state, you cannot be creative, you cannot be resourceful, so you can't think of any other solution other than I'm screwed.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to cultivate the practice of making sure that your default is not a survival response.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The
Regulating
default.
the nervous system,
Yeah.
taking a deep breath, not panicking.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately, they don't teach that in computer science programs.
no, no, they don't teach it
No.
anywhere. It's called the School of Hard Knocks. It's quite literally, if the poop hits the fan and the business is offline, the technology is the easy part. An example of this, quite literally, 3, 4 weeks ago, one of our customers got hit by ransomware, and these guys were prepared. They were, I would put them in the top 10% of preparedness for such a situation. It got everything. The only thing that was restorable were the database backups. And that was because, not to do this, but I insisted that the database backups were kept on a totally isolated, separate system away from everything else. And the ransomware got all of their other backups. It got their files, it got their email, it got their website, it got
Mm.
everything. So I've been helping them pick up the pieces the best that I can. The database is up, and now they're trying to put everything else back together, and it is brutal. But as a business, they just said, okay, we're a warehouse, we're a distributor, we have pen and paper, we have a couple of detached laptops here to keep some spreadsheets. Carry on. Things moved slower. Their phone was constantly busy, but carry on. And once the database got up and running, they quite literally called all their friends and family to come into their warehouses and count all the product on the shelf to figure out what they actually had left to sell. Because all the
Like doing a
quantities,
physical inventory check.
yeah, 400,000 square feet of warehouse, part by part.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. Yeah. Because they lost about 9 hours worth of actual data in the database because they had log backups up to a point, but stuff was changing while things were going down, and they lost all of that. So, your inventory in the system might say you have 100 of part X, except you may have actually sold 2 of it. So, you might have 98 on the shelf. It's all that kind of stuff, and that's where knowing the business, understanding the processes, that's the hardest part. And that's why when I see businesses with high turnover, they lose all that institutional knowledge and they don't understand why. They just understand what. And like this morning, I
Hmm.
was on the phone with somebody who had been at the business 35 years.
Ooh.
I mean, there is no amount of money that you could take to replace that person because of just what was in this guy's head.
Whoa,
He,
what are you, not even AI?
no, this guy literally worked every job at this company. He started life as a part-time person running forklifts, and now he's head of IT. He
Mhm.
understands what goes into every single task these people are doing.
Can't replace that.
Cannot replace that at all. So the best IT plans are just a start.
I mean, they can't replace it because it's such a valuable worker. But what I've been seeing in some institutions, not naming any names, but they're letting go of all that wisdom and that all that knowledge and thinking that you can just replace it with AI. But
Yep.
aren't we just seeing with AI being, let out to the public so early without a lot of safeguards? It's just that there's been an uptick in AI attacks and ransomware and just like phishing scams and all this kind of stuff, all these attacks. And I wonder what your perspectives are with being like in this industry.
It's
Hey,
catastrophic.
hey,
Yeah.
hey, hey, David, are we still recording?
Yeah, I'll cut it. But yeah, but no, here. Okay, thank you everybody. We will catch you on the next one. We're going to turn off the recording on this so we can be completely candid on this topic. So you all take it easy. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, do not hesitate. Reach out, let us know. Thank you all.